Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the commemorative coin half dollar series. Now, today we're going to be talking about one that changed foreign policy forever. Well, the coin didn't change foreign policy. The coin was actually commemorated because of this doctrine, and that is the Monroe Doctrine. So in order to do this, we're going to have to talk about two key players. So in this video, we're going to talk about those two key players. We're going to talk about the Monroe Doctrine itself, some of the major actors who utilize the Monroe Doctrine. We're going to talk about the coin, and then I have a surprise for you. I actually have a reading of the Monroe Doctrine. If you've never heard it, I strongly urge you to stay tuned to the end to listen to this. All right, so let's go ahead and dig into the history of this. Now, James Monroe was our fifth president, and John Quincy Adams was our sixth. Now, John Quincy Adams was the Secretary of State during James Monroe's time frame. This was very important because he understood the policies that were given by James Monroe. And he helped to ensure this, especially as we ran into the 1840s and later into the Civil War. Now, this wasn't just a normal doctrine that was given, it was just put out there. It was actually given in an address to Congress that happened on December 2nd, 1823. Now, the purpose of the Monroe Doctrine was to deter European powers from colonizing the Americas, North, Central, and South America. We wanted to make sure that the European nations didn't have any control or influence over the countries of the Americas, so that if there was an act of aggression, they were kind of right here. We wanted to do it not only kind of for border control, but we also wanted to maintain the sanctity of the Americas as a whole. Now, that wasn't always met with kind eyes and a gracious heart. So let's talk a little bit about the implementation of this throughout history. Now, as stated before, we talked about Oregon Territory, about the Western advancement when we looked at Lewis and Clark. The Oregon Territory was under much dispute, and President James Polk utilized the Monroe Doctrine to ensure that British entanglement during that time frame didn't get out of hand. He wanted to make sure that they were held at bay. It also was utilized later on during the Civil War. But there are three particular actions during this time frame that the Monroe Doctrine is most known for. One is the Roosevelt Corollary. Now, the Corollary asserted the United States' right to intervene in Latin American countries to help stabilize not only economic affairs, but to look at nations that were unable to pay international debts. Now, what this did is it basically gave them a lifeline to the United States in order for us to turn into what we call a police power, a regional police power. Now, we did this with interventions in Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Haiti. And we saw this in the 1930s when we had another Roosevelt in place. This would be Franklin D. Roosevelt, and this happened during the Good Neighbor policy. Now, the Good Neighbors policy, once again, was related to Latin America. Now, this particular one emphasized cooperation and trade over military force. Now, military force here was aimed at addressing some of the negative feelings that had happened in some of the engagements that we had talked about before. Remember, I stated that it wasn't always looked at with a kind eye. Well, this one was to help alleviate that. And then again, probably the most famous one that most of you know about is during the 1954 Bay of Pigs situation in Cuba. And as Russia pushed all the way up into 1961, where we came across an area that was very tumultuous and almost led us to World War III with Russia. And again, the Monroe Doctrine would be done there to help stop spread communism and keep their armament away from the American coast. Now, we've heard this again, and John Kerry in 2013 said that he was going to declare that the Monroe Doctrine era was over. However, it's impossible to continue to say that the doctrine's disciplines do not to this day continue to affect and influence U.S. policies abroad. It's just too embedded. And this is one reason that the commemorative coin itself was created. So let's look at the coin and talk about the coin itself. So first we look at the obverse or the front of the coin. And we're going to see President Monroe and we're going to see John Quincy Adams. And then this is one of the few of the coins during this series that has two faces on the obverse. Now, when you look at this, it's a nice coin. It's a good representation of the two. You see the Monroe Doctrine there. You see it's a good looking obverse. And then you turn it over. And I hate to say this, folks, but this is one reverse that totally kills it for me. Now I understand this was the representation of the Americas, North, Central, and South America. And it's showing the Monroe Doctrine there. But I can't help but think that Chester Beach just was either rushed during this time frame or was told that they needed to change some design elements because of the minting process. But this is just not one of my favorite reverses. There is so much good history in this coin. There's so much good that happened for the United States policy-wise that it just didn't do the coin justice in my book. And so unfortunately, while I like the story and I like the history of this, I'm not really a fan of this coin. So I will say this. This coin does lead us into next week's, which is something that not only does it continue on with policy, it talks about establishment. Next week, we're going to be talking about the Huguenot Walloon Tercentenary half dollar. Now, you know I'm excited about this because on the reverse is a ship, and not just any ship. It's a Dutch ship and an amazing coin. But at the very beginning of this, I talked to you about something that I was going to do, and that is to play a recording of the Monroe Doctrine for you. So ladies and gentlemen, if you've never heard this, if you've never taken time to read or listen to the Monroe Doctrine, I urge you to listen to this now. This is Frostbyte. If you've enjoyed this so far, do me a favor, smash that subscribe button and listen to this. I bid you all a wonderful adieu.
That at the proposal of the Russian imperial government, made through the minister of the emperor residing here, a full power and instructions have been transmitted to the minister of the United States at St. Petersburg to arrange by amicable negotiation the respective rights and interests of the two nations on the northwest coast of this continent. A similar proposal has been made by His Imperial Majesty to the government of Great Britain, which has likewise been acceded to. The government of the United States has been desirous by this friendly proceeding of manifesting the great value which they have invariably attached to the friendship of the emperor and their solicitude to cultivate the best understanding with his government. In the discussions to which this interest has given rise, and in the arrangements by which they may, the occasion has been judged proper for asserting, as a principle in which the rights and interests of the United States are involved, that the American continents, by the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintained, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers. It was stated at the commencement of the last session that a great effort was then making in Spain and Portugal to improve the condition of the people of those countries, and that it appeared to be conducted with extraordinary moderation. It need scarcely be remarked that the results have been so far very different from what was then anticipated. Of events in that quarter of the globe, with which we have so much intercourse, and from which we derive our origin, we have always been anxious and interested spectators. The citizens of the United States cherish sentiments the most friendly in favor of the liberty and happiness of their fellow men on that side of the Atlantic. In the wars of the European powers in matters relating to themselves, we have never taken any part, nor does it comport with our policy to do so. It is only when our rights are invaded or seriously menaced that we resent injuries or make preparation for our defense. With the movements in this hemisphere, we are of necessity more immediately connected, and by causes which must be obvious to all enlightened and impartial observers. The political system of the Allied powers is essentially different in this respect from that of America. This difference proceeds from that which exists in their respective governments, and to the defense of our own, which has been achieved by the loss of so much blood and treasure, and matured by the wisdom of their most enlightened citizens, and under which we have enjoyed unexampled felicity. This whole nation is devoted. We owe it, therefore, to candor and to the amicable relations existing between the United States and those powers to declare that we should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. With the existing colonies or dependencies of any European power, we have not interfered and shall not interfere. But with the governments who have declared their independence and maintain it, and whose independence we have, on great consideration and on just principles, acknowledged, we could not view any interposition for the purpose of oppressing them, or controlling in any other manner their destiny, by any European power in any other light than as the manifestation of an unfriendly disposition toward the United States. In the war between those new governments and Spain, we declared our neutrality at the time of their recognition, and to this we have adhered, and shall continue to adhere, provided no change shall occur which, in the judgment of the competent authorities of this government, shall make a corresponding change on the part of the United States indispensable to their security. The late events in Spain and Portugal shew that Europe is still unsettled. Of this important fact, no stronger proof can be adduced than that the Allied powers should have thought it proper, on any principle satisfactory to themselves, to have interposed by force in the internal concerns of Spain. To what extent such interposition may be carried, on the same principle, is a question in which all independent powers whose governments differ from theirs are interested, even those most remote, and surely none of them more so than the United States. Our policy in regard to Europe, which was adopted at an early stage of the wars which have so long agitated that quarter of the globe, nevertheless remains the same, which is not to interfere in the internal concerns of any of its powers, to consider the government de facto as the legitimate government for us, to cultivate friendly relations with it, and to preserve those relations by a frank, firm, and manly policy, meeting in all instances the just claims of every power, submitting to injuries from none. But in regard to those continents, circumstances are eminently and conspicuously different. It is impossible that the Allied powers should extend their political system to any portion of either continent without endangering our peace and happiness. Nor can anyone believe that our southern brethren, if left to themselves, would adopt it of their own accord. It is equally impossible, therefore, that we should behold such interposition in any form with indifference. If we look to the comparative strength and resources of Spain and those new governments, and their distance from each other, it must be obvious that she can never subdue them. It is still the true policy of the United States to leave the parties to themselves, in hope that other powers will pursue the same course.